Okay, welcome. This lecture is going to be talking about ethics and technology. I would like you to if you don't already have it in front of you or haven't already read it, click in the Readings tab. There's the NASW and ASWD Standards for Technology and Social Work Practice. And kind of have it open, perhaps as you're listening to the lecture and kind of thinking about that. So I'm just going to kind of start with, I think, a good quote from NASW and ASWD's kind of standards for practice, social work practice, and that is that many technologies are powerful but fragile. Crucial information can be lost or intercepted. Not all websites providing information are reliable, and service providers can easily misrepresent themselves and their credentials online. So I'd like to kind of start the lecture with this idea of kind of technology and social work practice, and that NASW is the National Association of Social Workers, and ASWD is the Association of Social Work Boards. And they have kind of got together prior to 2005, because these standards were published in 2005, to talk about some of the technologies and kind of how that's going to impact practice and come up with some standards. So I say that because a lot's happened since 2005, or even before then, because this was published in 2005, which means it probably started some of the stuff beforehand. So I guess I want that kind of in the back of your mind. So what guides social work practice? What guides our practice, ethical practice, I'll say, is the National Association of Social Workers has kind of the code of ethics. And then in order to be licensed in each state, the Board of Social Work Examiners, like the Maryland Board of Social Work Examiners, is how I obtained my social work license. And I need to follow that code of ethics. And if I don't, then I can be held accountable and kind of be liable for not meeting that and kind of not meeting those ethical requirements. So I want to kind of start with that, is that kind of what guides our practice is that certainly the code of ethics is published in NASW, the National Association of Social Workers, but that because I am licensed through the state of Maryland, then that is kind of where my credentials come from, and I am kind of held accountable to that code of ethics through the Maryland State Board. And they tend to be very similar, but I guess as I'm going through this lecture, you'll kind of see some different sites that I have. So this idea that confidentiality in an electronic medium can quickly evaporate, jurisdiction, liability, malpractice can kind of blur between state lines. There's many digital divides. If you don't know kind of what that is, this idea of, I have access to technology, I'm an instructor in the university, I have a computer on my desk, I can access technology kind of all the time. You may be a social worker in a homeless shelter, and you have access to a computer and resources, but what are you going to tell your client who doesn't have a home, never mind a computer, like, oh, just hop on the internet, and you can actually apply there, for whatever service? Well, that's not going to happen because, again, their basic needs aren't being met, so they're not going to be able to kind of, gather resources kind of at home on their computer. So that's kind of that digital divide. And that really clients and social workers may have kind of unrealistic expectations for what technology can kind of provide for us. So like I said, NASW and ASWD, so kind of social work boards came together and they said, okay, let's come up with some standards for technology and social work practice. We all, as you can imagine, kind of our code of ethics talks about kind of acting ethically, ensuring competence. We want to protect our clients. We want to uphold the values of the profession. We want access to technology. We want clients. We want to ensure clients have access to the technology. We want to be practicing in a culturally competent way. So we're thinking about kind of the vulnerable populations, those that don't have access, and being able to still get them the services that we need. We need to be competent and proficient in our technological skills. We need to help clients if that's part of what they need in terms of getting their needs met. And that we need to recognize that kind of where we're providing the services and where the client receives services is kind of like, is that within the same jurisdiction? So I'm in the state of Maryland, I'm licensed in the state of Maryland, I'm providing a service for my client in the state of Maryland, that's all good. But I'm providing services outside of my client perhaps resides in Kentucky, what does that mean? Because I'm not licensed in Kentucky, and so kind of providing regulations that way. That I represent myself kind of accurately, so I have a website. I don't, but let's just say I did have a website for my agency, that the material that I have on there about my licensure or about where I'm licensed is accurate. So I'm not stating that I'm licensed in Kentucky when in fact I'm not. That I'm ensuring kind of confidentiality and privacy and security of documentation in terms of technology. So, it's easy to provide confidentiality with documentation if I work in an office and everything's in a paper file, and we're required to kind of keep our files in a locked cabinet behind a locked door. But what if I actually have that information on my computer? And my computer's a laptop, and I take my laptop in, and so my case notes on my laptop, which goes home with me, and my car gets stolen. So this idea of where do we kind of keep our kind of records, especially if they're electronic, and what does that look like? So how are we perhaps providing information, use the fax material as referrals, but maybe now we are sending them electronically via email. Are we sending those documents in password protected kind of ways, that type of thing. And basically ensuring that the highest quality services are being kind of provided to our clients. So we know technology has kind of really helped us advance maybe even social work practice, especially if you think about advocacy. Because you can certainly, you guys probably get these too. I get a ton of petitions online or through email. That didn't exist way back then. With grassroots, in 1990, if you wanted to have a petition signed, you went door to door. Well, you don't have to do that anymore. We now have email. So that type of thing has kind of helped us in kind of mobilizing communities or organizations that way. So we want to kind of advocate for the technology, maybe even in our community. Maybe you work, at a homeless shelter, and you want a computer center at your shelter so that your clients can go in and apply for jobs or, apply for different services that they need and be able to have access to that technology. And it's important for us to be well informed about kind of the technology practice in our office. So at my previous agency, we did enter notes kind of in a database. It was very simplistic. It wasn't a Windows-based program back in the day. But what does that kind of look like, and what's the security of that? And that's something that whether when you go out to your agencies and your field placements, or when you're out there working, what's kind of the setup? What's the security in terms of where this material is being saved or stored in terms of the server or whatnot, or what material, when you write a case note on your computer, where does it go to, and how is that kind of saved? What's the protection there for your clients? So kind of thinking about that, and that's kind of what this area is looking to address. So what are some of the ways that we can kind of be providing services, and maybe some of the advantages of advancing our practices that way in terms of being competent? We want to be able to be a competent practitioner and kind of know the technology and know what's kind of out there, just as you would be a competent clinician and kind of, having a good expertise in, say, domestic violence or addictions or whatever your area of interest is. Certainly using technology to conduct research, apply research, and distribute research. We know definitely, just what I've seen kind of in my lifetime, we used to have to go to the library to access a journal, and now, on the click of a button from the library databases have so much stuff online, and if they don't, they can scan it to you and email it to you within like 3 to 5 days. So you have much more access to research and through technology, and you can certainly capture it and evaluate it and distribute it a lot more easily than you used to. and certainly applying maybe supervision that way if that's happening through technology, and thinking about the same thing that you would apply to um, apply in a face-to-face kind of supervision setting. So again, I think those are kind of just some of the competencies that ASWD and NASW have kind of set up in terms of what's kind of guiding our practice. Now, I don't know what you all think about this, but it is very kind of general stuff. So a future assignment that you're going to have is going to ask you to kind of evaluate the ASWD and NASW kind of standards for practice. And one thing as you're reading this, be thinking about, what are some things that maybe we need to think about kind of putting in the next publication of this. Like I said, this was published in 2005 and isn't really specific. Do we need to be more specific in terms of what practices we need to be having that way? So if you go and look at kind of what the Maryland Social Work Board has kind of published, when you think about kind of what technology it has in there, we have to maintain documentation of a client's record. And so we have to make sure that everything we maintain is confidential and the identities are protected when the computer and internet and technologies are used. So that's kind of really general. But at least it kind of does address that. It's pretty general, but it does kind of address that we need to keep that confidential that way. The licensee, we need to, when we're thinking about us as the social worker, engage in solicitation. So, which is noted here in terms of not only in person and on the telephone, but also in social media. So social media is kind of very general. We're going to talk more about that next week. But kind of in social media, like how are we presenting ourselves and how are we maybe soliciting things using kind of our profession to solicit things. So we'll talk more about that. But again, you're starting to see some of these things kind of noted in here and just kind of highlighting some of the pieces that have to do with technology. We may not, as a social worker, I may not enter a dual relationship with a client. So, or an individual with whom the client has a close relationship. So I can't, have an intimate relationship with my client. I can't date my client's, brother, things like that. So that's kind of noted in here, but dual relationship. How the world becomes a lot smaller on Facebook, right? So what does that maybe look like in terms of relationships? So thinking about that in terms of applying that to technology. Now, so that's kind of what Maryland Social Work Board has kind of put out. And so I'm kind of trying to help you see the link between this and technology. Let's look at the NASW Code of Ethics and kind of where they note anything kind of with technology. And this idea that when we are a social worker and we're providing a service, via, say, electronic media, and they're using a computer or technology or radio or television, we need to inform the recipient or our client of the limitations and the risks associated with such services. So this idea of making sure that they're informed that I am a Maryland licensed social worker, and I'm not sure based, if I'm providing services over the computer, if they tell me they live in Maryland, okay, but do they really live in Maryland? So that idea of kind of informing them of the limits to practice that way. We need to really be taking precautions to make sure that we're maintaining our confidentiality. So when I'm sending material, I'm a social worker who's working in a hospital, and I actually am referring a client, an elderly woman who broke her hip, and I'm referring her to a rehabilitation facility. So back in the day, we used to fax that material. Now we may actually send it through email or submit it through kind of like an electronic connection between my hospital and the rehab facility. So what does that look like? Is this a secure way of sending material? You ever see at the bottom of those kind of faxes, like, if you receive this in error, please destroy and discard? Because that information probably has the client, the patient's name, their social security number, their address, all this like kind of personal pertinent information, in addition to perhaps several diagnoses, and whether it be medical or psychological, and that's something that could kind of get out there. So ensuring that there is a kind of safe way of transmitting information. And of course, my question would be like, how do you guarantee that, right? What does that kind of look like? So this is actually another good thing to kind of be thinking about that we can apply to the technology piece, is that we as social workers should not permit our private kind of life or private conduct to interfere with our ability to kind of fulfill our professional responsibilities. That's, again, very general, but if you think about it, it could be applied to kind of technology and kind of social media that way. So, if I'm posting things on my Facebook account about what a rough day I had and how hard it was to see such and such case, what kind of message is that sending to a client who could potentially have access to my Facebook account if I don't have it set at private? So that type of thing. So we want our private life to kind of not interfere with our personal life. The other thing, our professional life. The other thing is it can work the other way around. Is what if I post a lot of inappropriate pictures on my Facebook account, and my boss sees that, my agency sees that, my client sees that. How is kind of my personal life kind of being brought into my professional life? Even though that wasn't really my intention, I put it on my Facebook account. But Facebook isn't just between you and your friends; it's between you and the rest of the world. So that's something to kind of be thinking about. So that we shouldn't really be soliciting or endorsing kind of anything outside of there. And there's perhaps ways that we could do that, through maybe Facebook, or nowadays you can kind of like things and not like things. And again, if we are seen kind of as an authoritative figure in our agency or with our clients, then what kind of things are we in this selling to them based on kind of what our likes or dislikes are if they have access to that information? So I kind of talked a lot about Facebook and social media, and that lecture is actually coming up kind of next, but I guess I wanted to start this conversation first with what is kind of the ASWD and NASW kind of got together to create this focus on technology and social work practice, but then they each have kind of their own kind of code of ethics which guides our practice. And I'd like you to just start, as you reflect back on this material and kind of read this material, think about where technology falls in this. Where do you fall kind of in the technology use at this point? Our next lecture is going to get you thinking about technology and social work practice, and maybe technology and your kind of personal use with it. And you can kind of balance both lectures back and forth to see what works for you. Thanks so much and have a good day.